This is the Fly Culture Podcast with me, your host, Pete McLeod. Pete McLeod spends his time organising fly fishing trips around the world for anglers. I talk to him about destination fly fishing, learn about fishing the flats, and the fish he is so passionate about above all others, the giant trevally. So this morning I'm in Hampshire with Pete McLeod from Aardvark McLeod. We're going to talk a little bit about his life in fishing, about some good advice, I think, from bone fishing and saltwater fishing perspective, along probably, I would guess, with some chalk stream stuff as well. So Pete, thanks for having me this morning. It's great to be here. Good to see you again. You're in good shape?
I'm in great shape, Pete. It's good to see you. Thanks for dropping by the offices. Been excited to do this. I do love a good podcast.
This one, hopefully, I'm really looking forward to as well, and particularly your giant trevally stories as well, and how that all came about as well. But I think probably the best place to start is at the beginning and where you're from. We're in Hampshire, as I said, right now. Is that where you hail from?
No, actually, I was born in Hong Kong.
Oh, wow.
Born out there in 76, and I was over there as a colonial brat for about 7 years, and then shipped back to Old Blighty for education. Went through the public school system, which was a pleasure and a pain, and got spat out the other side as a fairly peculiar individual, I suppose, but with a complete obsession for fishing.
And where did that come about? Was it at school that happened, or did you meet someone? Was it chance, or was it a fishing family and it was destined to be?
It was kind of a combination of both, if I'm honest. When I was about 5, I think I had a friend who was living down the road from where I was, there was a lake in front of their house, and we were sat there playing away, and we saw these fish cruising around on the surface. And so I went home to Dad, and I said, Dad, there's fish there. I want to go and try and catch them. So he pulled out of some cupboard this incredibly antique-looking bamboo stick, if you like, with rod rings made of sort of bent-over bits of wire sellotaped onto it, and a sort of old reel or whatever. Went down there. I don't think he really took me particularly seriously, as most fathers probably don't in that situation. Anyway, I hooked into probably a 15-pound carp.
Oh, wow.
Which then proceeded to annihilate the tackle that I'd been given. So all of the rings came off,
Brilliant.
The reel exploded, then the line snapped, and that was it. I was hooked for life.
So you didn't land it then, I guess?
No, absolutely not. No, there was no way that was going to happen.
That's a good way to start, isn't it? Because often in fishing, if you sort of started with that 15, where do you go from there?
Yeah, exactly. But it left me with this burning desire to actually really crack onto that. Anyway, I went home and I regaled the story to my father, who he had been a fisherman in his youth and a fly fisherman, and he came with me. We looked at it, and he suddenly saw where I was coming from, and anyway, we started course fishing together.
Nice.
And then about a year later, his passion for fly fishing took over again. So we started going fly fishing. So, by the time I was 6.5, 7, he was taking me stillwater trout fishing.
Nice. And whereabouts was that?
Norfolk.
So Narborough, around those sort of places?
Yeah, I mean, we were up in Hunstanton, but we used to go down to a place called Edgefield to begin with.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. It was a great time together. I think the first rod I had was made out of an old tank aerial.
Excellent.
Which probably weighed about 3 tons.
Yeah.
I think I spent a lot of time in trees looking for flies.
Yeah, we've all been there. Yeah.
But that's where the passion was born. And then from there, my brother got into it. My mother then got into it.
Oh, wow.
So then as a family, we'd spend endless summers in Scotland fishing on rivers with no water in them at all and no idea what we were doing. And, that's where it really came from, I suppose.
So your mentor really was your father, and then built from there, or did someone else come into your life latterly that sort of helped shape you? And
I think by the time I hit school, because we did have a fishing club at the second school I went to at Harrow, and a lot of old boys had water down here, and they would let fishermen come down. So there were a few people who shaped it, but mostly by that point I was reading the magazines.
Great.
So probably like you, I was reading Charles Jardine's articles, Pete Cockrell's articles, and I even had a bonefish hat like Charles did.
Yeah, with the flaps that
which actually since he's donated to me, and I have.
Wow. Wow. You'd have that framed and put up on the
Yeah,
wall,
that's
I
exactly
guess.
what I'm going to do with it.
Yeah.
Because it's not much use for anything else.
Yep.
And I got into float tubing because I thought that was really cool. And at that point, I went off and I did the float tubing nationals. And unbelievably, I managed to win.
Oh, well done.
Knowing nothing about reservoir fishing, I think I'd stopped somewhere to have a pee and seen a bunch of fish moving and hit a load of fish that happened to be smashing fry at that precise moment on Thornton. I would have never caught a fish otherwise.
Yeah.
And that introduced me to an incredible character called Steve Parton, who ran a company called Spartan Fishing Tackle. Now, Steve, as you well remember, was very, very opinionated.
Said it like it was, didn't
yes,
he? Yeah,
he certainly said it
absolutely,
how it was.
Yep.
So I used to spend some time going up and working in his industrial unit, tying flies, learning how to make float tubes, stitching bass bags, spooling up backing, dyeing materials in the back of the unit. It was a great way to get into the industry, if you like. So that's really where that started. And then my parents had, by that stage, evolved to being salmon fishermen, and they went to Russia for the first time.
Oh, wow. That must have been early days in
it was
opening
early
up.
days.
Yeah,
on Varzugo.
Right, wow.
And they did a couple of trips there. They got to know the owners at Roxton's, and they turned around to Christopher Robinson and said, "We've got this young kid who's incredibly enthusiastic about fly fishing. We don't know what to do with him. Have you got any use for him?" So he took me to Norway when I was 16.
Wow.
Where I became General Dog's Body, and I absorbed information like a sponge. So I spent 2.5 months doing my first season there on the River Orr, which is where I, funnily enough, ended up guiding with Espen Murder, who's now the owner of Guideline.
Wow.
And his father taught me an enormous amount. Johan Murder.
It shows it's such a small world, fly fishing. I know.
Tiny industry.
Yeah, it is. If you've been around, you kind of meet people and
Exactly.
or re-meet them again somewhere down the line as well, don't you?
That always happens, and the time I've spent in the industry, there's just the same characters just revolve around the different areas of the business.
So at this stage, did it feel as though you were thinking this is going to be a career, fishing is going to be my career, or were your parents trying to get you out of that mindset and hope you went and got a proper job?
They definitely wanted me to go and get a proper job.
Yeah.
So I was doing guiding in my holidays. So after university or after school, I'd get on a plane, go to Norway, do a season, and then I'd come back and I did my exams, etc. I graduated and I went to try and get a job in the city, as quite a lot of other people do. I'm really glad I didn't get one because I would have been dreadful. I have no interest in finances at all, I'm afraid. So I probably would have been cut in the first round. But I did get to various interviews, and I just pulled the plug on it. I walked into Farlow's and asked for a job.
Wow.
And they stupidly gave me one.
Wow. How many years ago was that then?
So that must have been 1999.
So that would have been the funky old store as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So with Brian Fratell
Yep.
and Nick Armstead and
Yes, of course.
all Tim Pilcher.
Yep.
All of those characters.
Yeah,
who
their
now
names
own-
we know. Tim's written for Fly Culture actually as
Oh, is
well.
he?
So about one of his exploratory trips to Clipperton. Yeah.
Yes, would have been.
Yeah. So and along there at the time, you sort of had Farlow's, you had the Hardy store.
Yep.
Was there that for a short time there was Tide Lines or something? Was
Tidelines
that around then?
That was Tim's shop,
Right. Yep.
which was a bit of a sad story because that ended up being taken over by Sportfish.
Yes.
And Tim came back to Farlow's.
Right. Yes, I kind of remember that now because it was just in one.
It was
in Pall Mall, really, wasn't it? Yeah.
But other characters that turned up at the time was Francois Botha, who's now running some stuff in South Africa. Keith Rosinis ended up at Farlow's. Yaku Lucas was at Farlow's. So a lot of people began a career working in the tackle trade in London and learning the ropes, getting to know the characters, and learning about these incredible destinations.
Yeah. And I assume you had people coming, you had to gen up on these things because you'd have people coming into the store saying, I'm going to, because bone fishing must have, it's obviously been going for a little while, but it was really coming into people's mindset.
It was
around
just
then.
beginning to really take off at that
I remember
point.
buying the Bonefish book around then.
Exactly.
And it frightened the life out of me, to be honest, because it implied it was the blue one with the yellow writing, this sort of, whatever it was, 12 inches by whatever it was size. And it seemed to me as though I needed to make 90 plus feet cast into the wind. And the guide would tell me to drop and give him 20 if I didn't cover the fish. And it frightened me for a long time.
I think that's the Florida Keys.
I think it was, actually. Yeah. That still goes on, I guess. Or does it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Florida isn't an area that we cover, actually.
Right.
For exactly.
Yes.
There are
frightened the life out of me. But I know that's when I was becoming aware of saltwater and bonefish and stuff as a destination.
Well, I had the jump on a lot of people at that point because my brother, who was also obsessed with fishing at that point, had done a couple of saltwater trips. He'd done Christmas Island and he'd done Mexico and Belize, and he decided for my 21st that he would take me to Turnif Atoll in Belize.
Wow.
With my parents. So we all went together, and that first trip, I'll show you some pictures, they'll make you laugh. So I dressed myself from an army surplus shop in shirt, men's, tropical and cut-off trousers. I looked utterly ridiculous, but I did have the Charles Jardine.
Excellent. Well, that's for
style hat.
The vibe must have been coming down to you.
Had to have that.
Yep.
And that experience blew my mind. I'd done a lot of stillwater trout fishing by that point. I taught myself how to double haul from Lefty Cray's longer distance fly casting.
I know
book,
it well.
Which I still have on my shelf and refer to. And I caught my first permit on that trip. And that just fried my brain. The bone fishing.
Wow, that's a good start. Mind you, I guess Belize is a good place
it's a great spot for permit.
Yeah.
Even now, Turnif is still a good spot for permit. But that first fish competed for the fly on a sandbar with 2 or 3 others and ripped off 300 yards of line on the first run.
Wow.
I could see the spool through the back.
Yeah, wow.
And I never really recovered from that experience. But that stood me in great stead when I arrived at Farlow's as being 22, 23 and having had some saltwater experience. And I think I became much more interested in saltwater fishing at that point. And just trying to figure out how to make my next move. Yeah. So sat in the tackle shop in Farlow's, I was kind of thinking that maybe I'd try and get a job with Roxton's. And then Will Bond from Frontiers came tapping on the door because their office was
around
just
the
up the
corner.
road.
Yep.
And he said, well, perhaps you'd like to come and work for Frontiers.
Wow.
At which point I said, gee, let me think.
Yep.
That would be great. So Will Bond took me under his wing. He was the saltwater specialist there. And he taught me an enormous amount about the industry. I mean, you arrive at a place and you think that you know a reasonable amount about fishing. You've done quite a lot of fishing. And I arrived at Frontiers and realised that actually I knew nothing. I knew a tiny little corner of the world reasonably well. And that expanded my mind, expanded my horizons, and they gave me an incredibly good education.
And how did these things work out? Do they say you need to go there and learn about the destination that you're selling, or was it second-hand sort of information from the guys? How does that work? Because I'm hoping it's going to be the answer that you're going to give me, but
it's there are a lot of educationals.
That sucks.
Which was truly terrible.
Yeah.
So I think I'd been in the office for all of a week before I was dispatched to TDF for 10 days to learn about Rio Grande
and sea trout.
And it was a combination of educational trips and a combination of last minute cancellations. Where they could then use that to teach. Exceptional company and very, very good at teaching people what they're selling. Because at the end of the day, normally the first question that comes in on the international side is, have you been there? Do you have the experience? And that makes an enormous difference. So yeah, I was very fortunate, but I ran with the ball.
And did you find your fishing was evolving, improving as you went? Or did you take steps to do that? Were you having help with that, or you were just picking it up on the fly and going from there?
I was obsessed. I still am obsessed. Good. So any new book that came out, I would buy and read. I was in the position where I could fish with some of the best guides in the world. And I just listened to everything.
And how old were you then?
I started at Frontiers when I was probably 23.
Wow.
23, and so I was there for just over 5 years.
Wow.
And I was probably doing 2 or 3 trips a year. It was a fascinating time, but I just absorbed everything I could from anybody who would teach me anything.
Fantastic. And that's the right age as well, isn't it? And at this stage, do you think your parents realised this ain't going to happen. They accept. That's
I think
the
they
route you're going
realised that fishing was going to become my career when I bolted from the city and moved into Farlow's.
Yeah.
But my father very soon forgave me when he realised I could get him some very good discounts.
Yeah.
On some rods. But no, I think he was to begin with very worried that I wouldn't be able to manage in life because let's be honest, no one in the fishing trade gets rich. I don't think anybody.
No.
We do it out of sheer love and passion, and that's really where it stems from.
Yeah.
So yes, I think they were probably a little worried, but I think when they realised how obsessed I was and the career path I was taking, because I had consciously as a guide decided that this is really where I want to go. I want to be in the agency side because it's the nearest thing you're going to get to a proper job, but at the same time being involved in an area of the industry where you can indulge your passion.
Yeah.
So I think they relaxed a bit at that point, and since then they've been nothing but totally supportive.
That's brilliant, isn't it? And so the Frontiers gig that lasted
It's probably just over 5 years.
5 years, so proper time with them.
Yeah.
Yep. And then what was the next step? Was there a change? You went on to another company?
The next step was actually here.
Oh wow! So you decided you wanted to.
There was a reason. Frontiers was relocating from London.
Right, got you.
Now I just bought a house with my wife.
Yep.
Because I got married fairly early on as well. You know, it was a tough time, and the relocation just wasn't going to work for us.
Where were they going to?
They were going to Gloucestershire.
Right.
And that just wasn't going to work for us.
Yeah.
So I sadly handed in my resignation, and I'd had a fortuitous meeting on Alphonse when I was taking a group-led trip out there in the February, I think it was, of 2005, and I'd met my current chairman, and he called me up one day and said, "I've got a plan so cunning you could pin a tail on it and call it a weasel."
Yeah.
The old weasel ploy.
Oh, I know that one.
At which point there was no way I could really turn down a conversation with someone who starts like that.
Yep.
One thing led to another, and it all kind of merged into a similar timeline that we began Aardvark McLeod.
Wow.
I was 28.
Wow.
I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I freely admit it. I was good at selling fishing.
Yep. And I guess you had contacts by then as well.
Lots of contacts.
Yep.
I knew a lot of people within the industry.
Yep.
And I knew what I was talking about in terms of selling fishing, but I knew nothing about running a business.
Yep.
And, you know, with all businesses, someone once told me when you start a business, your business will only fail if you don't work hard enough.
Good advice.
And I worked like a dog. And that continued for quite some time. But I was very lucky to be surrounded by some people who really did know what they were doing. My chairman is sort of involved in a number of other different businesses. And I also parked myself down here at Aardvark Safaris. And that's where the Aardvark name comes from.
Right.
So they have the bottom half of this building.
Yep.
And then we had shared directorship to begin with. And I worked out of their offices. So I walked out of one office and I walked into another.
Got you.
And I was fortunate enough that some very, very trusting clients decided to come with me.
Wow, that's amazing. Yep.
And I started straight away.
Brilliant. And what did you do? Did you focus on locations you knew, or did you have a feel that there would be upcoming places that you would probably want to target and look at taking people to?
Again, a combination of the two. There are some staple destinations which a lot of people want to go to. I knew them well enough to be able to sell those, but there were also some destinations such as the outer islands in the Seychelles, which I had not been allowed to go near while at Frontiers. It didn't suit their database at the time. I was mad for it, as you can imagine. The other one I was mad for was Cuba because we weren't allowed to sell it.
Right.
So those are the two I focused on straight away. And because of the Russian situation and that the big companies, you know, they deal with Russia, it's their bread and butter. They have the risk on the ground. I didn't want to get involved in that, so I decided to turn my attention to Iceland, become an Icelandic specialist.
Cool.
A lot of rivers, a lot of operators, easy logistics. I met a couple of very, very capable individuals over there, and we built up a very good rapport, which is still going today, nearly 15 years later.
I was looking at Alex's pictures just before we sat down. Yeah, absolutely.
And we've continued that trend. So it started that way, and like all things, it just grows and grows. Someone asks for another destination, someone wants to do something.
And what are you doing with these things? Are you actually searching down, or are people coming to you, or is it a bit of both? Or
it's a bit of both. Most of our clients still come through word of mouth.
That's the best, isn't it?
We don't advertise.
Wow.
And most of our clients come from having spoken to someone else who's travelled with us, who has been hopefully pleased by the service and the information that we provide.
Right.
And the administration. I mean, our administration is extremely tight. And actually, that's probably the most important thing about international travel.
And it looks to me now as well that even 15 years in, is it with Aardvark then? 15, you're still trying to evolve things. And, you know, I know you set up your YouTube channel where you're trying to give information, bits and pieces like that. Do you find that's a constant curve that you've got to keep up with?
I mean, that's a whole conversation of social media.
Yeah, I know we touched on it briefly.
And I know that
before we
you've touched on it also with Nick beforehand. And social media is a bane and a pleasure. The YouTube one, I've got a lot to say. Some people want to listen to it, some people don't. And I like to teach. So the YouTube was just a natural progression, if you like, for me to throw about some of the stuff that I've learned, and then also to delve into the information and knowledge of the guys who are working with me, like Alex Jardine and Stefan Jones and Charlotte Chilcott, my business partner, and now Ollie Thompson. So, you know, we've got a huge wealth of... We're nerds. You know, I told you before, we're the nerdy fishermen.
Nice. I'm with you.
We're really geeky,
Yep.
and we like to discuss leader setups, and we like to talk about flies and what materials are in them, and exactly the definitions of which rods are suitable for which job.
Good. We're going to come on to some of that geeky stuff as well.
Fine.
So
I'll leave that to a little
truly
later.
geek out very, very shortly. And so how do you find fishing? This is a bit of a broad question, I guess, but how do you find the state of fishing at the moment, starting here and then looking wider?
From an international perspective, it's very busy at the moment. There's a lot of people looking outside of the UK and broadening their horizons on a fishing front. I suspect that is symptomatic of conditions up north, which is very sad. A lot of people ask me that question. They say, so Scotland's not fishing very well. Presumably that's great for you. Yeah, it's great right now. But what happens in 5 or 10 years' time? Where do clients of the future come from?
Yeah.
Because most people who fish internationally are those who've done it for a long time, who want to go and target either a specific species, or they've read in a magazine, or they've seen a video on some kind of destination that they desperately want to go to. And so what will happen if that training area is gone, which is where most of us have grown up, on our doorstep fishing for salmon in Scotland, where are they going to come from?
Do you think that's where social media does help you? That you are reaching those other people, the younger, dare I say it, the younger generation,
that's
that
definitely
are
a case.
looking for, and it seems to me, and we touched on again, that there are younger people out there doing cool, interesting stuff with fishing. Do you think the next thing, and I noticed last year, 2 years ago, more younger guys were talking to me about salmon fishing and getting into salmon fishing and bits and pieces like that. Do you think that's why you're doing these things, the YouTube, all the other bits and pieces, to embrace those guys and bring those into destination
Definitely,
fishing?
because that's the medium that they are looking at.
Yes, yeah.
I don't know about... Do you have children?
Yes, sir. Well, she's 27, so...
Okay, so I've got smaller kids, so they're 7 and 10. They don't watch television. They watch YouTube. I put a skybox into their playroom so that they could watch Sky. They never used it, so I took it out again. YouTube is there. It's the university of YouTube. Anything they want to learn, they can learn on YouTube.
And that's the interesting thing about Instagram as well. With those sorts of things, I get the impression people like it. And I always try, a friend of mine said to me, if somebody's made the effort to put something up there, the least I can do is like it. And I think that's a really nice thing. But it's very quick and passed through. Whereas information, people can sit down and watch, and you're probably reaching them and engaging them in a better, more interesting way, and adding value as well.
I think so. I mean, I'm not very good at some of the other forms of social media, being flatly honest. I haven't spent too much time trying to become an Instagram influencer or something like that. I mean, quite frankly, I haven't got time. And I think that there's a place for that platform. I'm not sure it's right for me personally. But Alex, for example, has a great following on Twitter. I can't even use Twitter. I don't even know how to work it. And I know, I mean, I'm only 42, and I describe myself as being relatively technical, but some of this stuff now.
Yes, it's super clever, isn't it?
It's, really clever.
Yes. Tom, who does our Instagram, he does all the logos and bits and pieces for that to make it look good. Otherwise, I'd make it look.
Alex whips these
mess.
stories together.
I've no idea. I'm trying to figure out how to do a story on Instagram. Still haven't done it. No. So anyone out there knows and can help me, I would love your help. So that would be super cool. Coming back to the salmon situation then, are you seeing, and I was very lucky, I did a trip with the guys last year for steelhead, not driven by the salmon and the issues that are going on, but are you finding salmon anglers now are looking at places like Alaska, British Columbia, Washington, those sorts of areas to go look at sea run fish in a different area? That is
definitely the case. The other big one is Argentina. So Argentina being the biggest sea trout destination on the planet, and you can fish down there as if you were fishing for salmon, but you're catching 15-20 pound sea trout, and it's in an incredible place. It's a wonderful trip. You get to go through Buenos Aires. You get to experience asados and Malbec up to your eyeballs, and it's a phenomenal experience. But yes, there is definitely an outflux of fishermen who are trying new things.
So does that mean you want to take them that way, or does that mean they may also look at the traditional bone fishing destinations as well, or does it combination
to be honest,
of everything?
Pete, as an agency, I don't mind. I'm merely facilitating.
Sure.
So we sell it all. We'll sell a bone fishing trip to the Bahamas, Belize, Mexico, whether it's the Seychelles, whether it's Venezuela, maybe not Venezuela right now. But any of these destinations, it's fine. We're about looking after people and making sure that they are getting what they want and the experience that they are looking for. We don't have any risk space, which is the sort of term we use in the industry. We're not trying to fill holes in different weeks or anything like that. Someone calls up and they say, I want to do this, or I want to experience this, and we work it down from a number of options down to working with them to figure out what's right for them, and then putting it all together as a fully bonded agency.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, I think that's given us a really interesting look into that. I think what we'll do is take the conversation in a different direction now and perhaps geek out on fishing, casting, gear and bits and pieces like that. And I'll throw you a few questions along those sorts of lines, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
So I'm going on my first trip. I want to go on a saltwater trip. I think probably the best place to start is Bones, is it?
Yep, definitely.
Fantastic. So what do I need to do to prepare for that trip? I've spoken to you. I booked my trip. Super excited about that. What do I need to do next?
First thing you'll do is go through your pre-departure information.
Yep.
I spend hours.
I mean, interesting stuff, exciting stuff.
Okay, I'm going to get that message across because in the office we spend hours writing these pre-departure informations of very detailed tackle information.
Yeah,
and then we send it out, and then we get a telephone call going, so what do I need? I'm like, read the pre-departure information.
Yeah, it's all in there. Yeah.
So that's why we're almost going down a video route of that as well, because we just go watch this.
Yeah,
but going back to your question, so if you're going to prepare for a bone fishing trip, firstly, don't be frightened like you were when you read your book. Not all guides are going to shout at you.
Subsequently found that out as well. And I've been on many bone fishing trips and have really enjoyed the guides and how they look after you as well. So that was allayed, actually. I should say that now that they are fantastic. The ones I've already experienced have been very good.
It's in their interest for you to catch fish.
Yeah.
And
I
some
did
people
have
don't get their head around that.
I did have a guide once that I was throwing at permit, and he went into the praying position. I don't know if that was more about
I think that was
me
probably,
hopefully getting the fish and possibly.
I would suspect that was the case because permit.
You got it.
And you can get the right fly in the right place, and they'll still give you the fin.
Yeah. Oh, tell me about it. Yeah. Yeah. So about the tackle and bits and pieces, and do people need, if you've got, is there kit that's going to translate for them?
A lot of modern kit will translate. The first thing you need to look at is your rod fixtures. Make sure that they're actually saltwater proof.
Yep.
I mean, you can get away with using freshwater kit, but I would recommend not, because if you don't wash it or anything like that, then essentially, salt corrodes so badly. It corrodes everything. And the actions tend to be slightly more different. Most saltwater ranges tend to have a little bit more butt section power, because the big difference between saltwater fishing and freshwater fishing is saltwater fish are considerably more powerful. And I love watching the expression of people's face when they hook into their first bonefish. Because the thing tears off at 30 miles an hour. Even a small one, even a 1.5 pound, 2 pound fish, they've never experienced anything like that in their lives. They've suddenly seen this thing called backing.
Yeah.
And lots of it.
Yes.
And then they have to wind it all back on again.
Yes.
So kit is very, very important. You've got to get your kit right, and that's also half the fun. He who dies with the most toys wins, obviously.
Yeah.
In terms of actual setups, that's also changed. When I first started in this trade, we all went for 9'8", 9'9" weights. These days, you can go with a 9'7" weight.
Yeah.
Rod technology has moved on so far that you can get the same power out of a much lighter rod, which makes the entire process considerably more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Lighter tackle, much more fun. Lighter presentation, probably better hookup ratio. You need a decent reel. The reel is almost more important than the rod, because the reel is the one which is going to take the bulk of the power. You need one which has got a really good drag system on it. So don't scrimp on a reel. I always tell people to buy the best kit you can afford. And there's a lot of very reasonably priced saltwater kit out there now.
It's hard to buy a bad rod these days, isn't it?
Yeah. There's no bad rods. There's just better ones.
Yeah.
So I personally fish with Hardy's. I love their new range of Zephyrus rods, and I use their Fortuna reels, which have got the best drag of any reel I've used. It's 0 to hero in one turn of the regulator, as they like to call it.
Yeah.
And I think that's important too, because what I can't stand are some of these reels where you have to keep turning the drag handle to get up to a certain amount of pressure, because they're designed to fish with certain tippets, which I don't really bother with. I don't fish IGFA regs on anything.
No.
I'm interested in landing a fish quickly and returning it quickly.
Yep.
So you've got your 9'7" weight, should we say? You've got a reel which is matched to that, and then you would go with a floating line. I never fish sunk lines or anything like that in the salt. You want a 9 to 12 foot leader as a basic setup. But what I will often do is, if you're fishing very skinny, i.e. very narrow depth of water, where some of these bones are even with their tails and their back fins out of the water, very exciting. Yep. I'll put an extra tippet on that, matching the end of the tippet, and you'd probably go down to, I would say 8, minimum 8, maximum I would go up normally to 11. If you've got areas where the fish have not had much pressure, you can go higher, and if you can go higher, go higher. I always finish that with a loop connection.
Yep.
I've always fished my flies on a loop so that they can swim freely.
Yep.
And fly choice is entirely determined about what the colour and nature of the bottom you're fishing over is, the depth of water, and what specific crustaceans are living in the area. So, if you're fishing over turtle grass, you probably want to be using something amber or brown.
Yep.
If you're fishing over a white sand bottom, you want tans and creams and stuff like that, so gotchas and things like that. You could go anywhere in the world with a gotcha and catch bones. Yeah. I mean, it's a be all and end all bonefish fly,
and pretty easy to tie if you roll your own as well.
Very easy to tie. Just a bead chain eye. Yeah, works perfectly.
Yeah. And one of the things I notice when people ask me about trips, and I've done nothing in comparison to you, but I've done a fair few, is one of the first things I say as well is sunglasses, and being able to spot the fish, isn't it? And that's I've seen it so many times that I'd rather spend more money on sunglasses so that you can see that fish.
Again, it's something we get asked a lot.
Yeah.
You know, why can't I just use my sunglasses? The better your lenses, the further out you can see the fish. And if you can't see the fish, you might as well not bother going.
Yeah.
This is a visual game.
Yeah.
Especially bone fishing in skinny water. It's one of the things that makes saltwater so exciting, is the visual element of it.
Yeah.
For me, that's what really gets me going.
Yeah.
It's the fact that I can hunt a fish.
It's like a rising trout, I guess.
It's like a rising trout.
Yeah.
So that is really, really important. Sunglasses. It's also, if you can geek out a bit, it's really good to have a few different lens tinges. So if you've got really bright sunlight, I like something like a blue mirror or a green mirror.
Yep.
If you're fishing in very shadowy conditions, then something like a sunrise lens. Wearing a pair of sunrise lens on the flats when it's overcast and slightly rainy, it's like someone has literally blown a light over the entire flat. And you can see things which you never would have been able to see otherwise. And then in the medium, I mean, if you were going to pick one lens to take on the flats, I'd probably go with a green mirror. Yeah. Because it's based on an amber tint.
Yeah.
And that makes fish pop quite nicely. You know, if you're spoiled, then, you know, have 2 or 3 pairs.
Yeah. Fantastic. One of the other things, I guess, and coming back to that book, and it turned out not to be true, that you're not making 90-foot casts into the wind. The guide always gets you in a good position, generally on your side or on your back. You're rarely throwing into it. But casting as well and double hauling just must make life so much easier.
If you can double haul well and you can cast well, what that is going to do is it's going to increase your opportunities. The one big difference when you're on a salt flat is the fish are moving and you're not, rather than being in a river. And you need to be able to maximize the opportunities as they arise. Suddenly a fish will swim around the corner. Could be a bonefish, could be a permit, could be a tarpon, could be a GT. You need to be good enough, ideally, to switch and make that cast. And the better you are, the more opportunities you will capitalize on. So if the fish suddenly appears, if it's a permit, it's almost certainly going to appear on your backhand and into the wind.
Yeah.
Because that's what they do.
Yes.
If it's a GT, it's going to charge towards you, and you need to make sure that you intercept it rather than trying to cast past it. And normally with very heavy kit. So that's also really, really important. So if you were going to concentrate on particular casts to utilize in the salt, I would definitely learn how to backhand cast. I think it's vital. I don't like casting cack-handed across my body, because when you're throwing some big flies around, you do not want one of those in the back of your head.
Nor does your guide, I would guess.
No, and obviously that's the biggest faux pas you can commit. Well, if you do that, you're not going to catch any more fish that day.
Yes, they will be 90-foot casts into the wind.
They will be 90-foot casts into the wind. But most bone fishing situations, you can creep up on the fish. And you can get close enough to fish for them in your capability.
And they're 40-foot cast, 40, 50-foot cast, a lot of typical bonefish stuff. They're not big cast,
are they? Closer.
Yeah.
I mean, 15 yards.
Yeah.
And that's when it gets really cool, because then you have to get down on your knees.
Yeah, cool.
Definitely get down on your knees, because then you drop your silhouette, and then actually you can catch them on your rod tip.
Wow. Yeah, that would be fun.
And we've done that a lot in the Seychelles. You know, when they're cruising over the white sands, they're coming in hungry. Some of these bones are big, and you drop right down onto your knees, and you're almost with your chest on the water, and the fish will take at the rod tip.
Nice.
And then
nice.
off it goes.
That must look fantastic.
So exciting.
Yeah. That sounds amazing. It was interesting, actually, while we're on bones now, and you saying about hooking them and stuff like that, and I taught somebody some fly casting the other day, and I said, what I'd like with your mantra, he was a stillwater angler and he was really hitting the forward cast really, really hard. And I said, I just want you to say, as you make your forward cast, don't hit it. And I used the example, when I'm standing at the front of a flats boat, all I'm saying is when I'm retrieving the fly is, don't strike. Don't strike.
That's
don't
one
strike.
of the hardest things that freshwater
and it worked
fishermen
really well for me.
Yeah.
It's worked really, really well.
The way quite a lot of guides do it is they just tell them to keep stripping.
Yeah.
Strip, strip, strip. So what we're actually talking about here, for those that don't know and haven't done saltwater fishing, we're talking about a strip set. or a strip strike. So in the salt, rather than raise your rod up and use the power in the tip section to set the hook, as if you would on a trout or something like that, and to strike upwards, we point the rod directly at the fish, preferably at arm's length, and then we take our other hand and then we set directly pointing at the fish. The reason for this is firstly, you don't generate enough power when you hook up that way round. When you pull the rod up in the air, the rod tip does not set nearly as much tension on the fly and the hook in the fish's mouth as pointing it directly at it. And that's one of the most crucial things that people mess up. And the other reason I say put the rod in front of you and hold it out at arm's length is because if you miss a strip, you can pull the rod back with your arm.
Nice. Good tip. Good tip.
And that's one of the things that you definitely learn when you're fishing for bigger saltwater species.
Yeah. I would think that's probably one of the hardest things a guide has to deal with a trout set, isn't it? And
I mean, you can see it.
Yeah.
You can see the hands go
Yeah.
like this. Don't trout set. I wasn't trout setting. You were.
But no, I think that's really good advice, and yeah, I just sit there doing that the whole time when
I
I'm
strip
fishing.
set salmon and trout now.
Yes, yeah,
I'm afraid, and I strike salmon.
Yeah,
and I know that's bad, but actually,
if it works,
Scandinavians have done it for years, and I'm afraid if I feel it, I'll boom, and set the hook, and then you just need to concentrate on freeing the line around your body, making sure that it doesn't get caught up on any hanging paraphernalia. Anything like that. So what I tend to do then is I hold the line in a loop in my fingers on the other hand, and I keep it out at arm's length, and I let that line feed up until it comes up, and then it's on the reel.
Nice.
And then I keep my palm away from the reel, because as soon as you start palming it, you apply extra pressure.
Yeah, peeing.
And quite often, if it's not 150-pound leader, off it comes.
Got you. Well, that's some really good advice, and we'll tie this little segment up with, if you were thinking about trying bonefish for the first time, where would you recommend is the best place to go?
My favourite destinations for trying bone fishing for the first time are the Caribbean and probably Belize and Mexico. Those are two great destinations to look at for your first time saltwater experience, because not only will you get into many different bone fishing environments, whether it's going to be over a marl bottom, a hard turtle grass bottom, coral, different edges that you can fish, but also you will encounter many of the other species as well. So baby tarpon, probably permit, snook, all of these different species that make saltwater fishing so fascinating. For me, it's the fact that anything could swim around the corner at any time.
And for me, I love, and we had in one of the intros for one of the magazine editions, we have 12 things that mean our life, and one of them was loving snook as much as bones, and I love them. I think they're a real unsung hero, I have to say.
I love snook, absolutely. When you're chucking flies underneath mangrove arms
cool,
and trying to persuade them to come out, here's a little tip if you really want to go and smash a load of snook. Fish on spring tides where you've got low tide first thing in the morning. So what that does is they have nowhere to go. So they have to come out of the mangroves, and they hang in the holes outside the mangroves and mill around. Snook and baby tarpon.
Nice.
And if you find yourself on a tide like that, then you can clean up.
Fantastic. Well, that's some great advice for anyone sort of considering going down that route. And, you know, like you say, it's a bit like your first salmon, your trout, whatever. That first scream of the reel with your bonefish, no matter the size, is amazing. Something you don't forget.
I mean, I would love to recommend Los Roques in Venezuela as well, and it's one of the best fisheries I've ever fished for bones, ever. For tailing fish, I mean, I remember you going out there with us a long time ago. Yeah. I mean, the size of the average size of the bonefish is phenomenal.
Yes, it was amazing fishing the pancakes. You know, there I was fishing, I have to say, 5 and 6 weight rods.
Yeah, you can go down to 5 and 6.
And it was fantastic. And one of the other fish I remember from there were the false albacore. Mind-blowing. And that was where you had to make long casts out to busting fish and trying to intercept them. It was phenomenal
Try
fishing.
not to hook a bird.
Yeah, and it was absolutely fantastic. But let's move on a little bit now. And I know your passion, GTs, the giant trevally, and what is it about
GTs.
them, and how did that come about?
I'd spent quite a few years in the Caribbean hunting permit. I had permit fever bad for a period of time. You know, they were the fish that was at the top of everybody's list.
Yep.
This was all really, I suppose, when saltwater fishing was still relatively new. And I'd been trying to recreate that experience that I had in Belize with that big permit. And I caught one or two. I lost a huge one in Venezuela, which after an hour, which made me feel quite ill. And I got an opportunity to go to the Seychelles. It was when Alphonse Island was just starting up, and I was selling it, and I went to experience what the fishery was like. And I think after 30 bones in the morning,
Wow.
you just like, it fries your brain, the quantity of fish which are down on those atolls. And I was with a guide called Serge, who is still fishing in the Seychelles and is a complete legend. He's a Seychelles wild guide. And he said, do you want to go and try for GTs? And I got to be honest, I didn't know much about GTs at that time. I knew it was Jack family, but I didn't really get the significance of what that meant. So we waded out off the edge of what's called Tam Tam Flat and went out into the surf line. And immediately your perspective changes because you are no longer in shin depth water. You're in waist depth water in the surf line. And there are other things in that surf line as well.
Yes.
So I was particularly nervous, I have to say. If someone had told me then that if you see a shark, you'll end up running towards it, I would never believe them. But sadly, that is now
that's
the
where
case.
they're right.
And a GT, not a particularly big GT, came in off the surf, down the wave edge. I put the fly in, and it ate it very obligingly. And I was then attached to a creature which I have never experienced the power on a fly rod before, ever.
Wow.
It just tore line off the reel. I was completely out of control. I mean, I was probably using, I think I was using an old TNT or something like that. And I was putting everything I had into a fish which was probably no more than 15 pounds.
Wow.
And I thought, oh my God. And that's really where the passion grew from.
That sounds kind of interesting because initially I had this view that they were throwing teasers out to bring the fish in, whereas that form of fishing, to me, stalking the fish down or spotting the fish in the surf, and I did a little bit, I'd say a little bit, but I didn't get, I got bluefins, which I don't know how, they're a lot smaller.
Pound for
obviously.
pound, they're probably
they're
hard
real
fighting.
bruiser. Yeah,
And they're
amazing
so
fish.
fast.
I love them. Yeah, I
So
thought they were
fast.
fantastic. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting to see that perspective. That's how I had it in my mind for quite some time, that they'd bring the fish in, and I know that goes on,
The
but
reason that you probably had that in your mind at the time is very early on, when no one had any
knew
idea
what to do, I guess. Yeah.
what the impact of teasing GTs was. Then there were operations, and I mean, I was guilty of it myself, fishing out there and teasing fish in off the edge normally, not normally on the flats, but normally off an edge. So if you were standing on an edge line and then on an atoll, it drops away to 1,200 feet. So you're getting as close as you can to the edge, and then bringing them in from the blue, which I still think in some situations is excusable, especially in Sudan or somewhere like that. But the main passion that I have for them is the visual element of stalking a very large fish on flats. And if you go down to Providence, which is where I've been fishing for the last 4 years or so, these fish are mostly sitting on rays on the flats. So you are targeting an individual fish. It's all visual, and you see that thing turn around, charge the fly, and it still gets me totally excited.
Yeah. And have you chased them in a lot of places?
I've chased those things all around the world.
Wow.
So I've chased them in Christmas Island.
Yeah.
I've chased them in Sudan. I've chased them in most of the Seychelles atolls. And where else have I been? I went out to Indonesia looking for them.
Wow.
So I bounced around the world hunting those things.
Yeah.
There's still probably no better place than the Seychelles.
Wow.
Just because of numbers.
Yeah.
it's phenomenal.
And so how did the book come about? Did you want to share your passion and that was an outlet to share that passion about it? Or how did that come about?
The book came about, I was sat on Farquhar Atoll and I started writing a pre-departure information. And I started writing and writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. And suddenly I realised that actually I'd written far more than was necessary. I was starting to really put a lot of detail in there, and I suddenly thought, you know what, there's a lot of material in here. Firstly, I need to see whether it's right. So I need to have people check it who know far more about this than I do. And secondly, this could be a chance to encapsulate everybody's knowledge. And that's how it kicked off. It started off as a project to... There was no information out there at the time. There was very little.
Right.
And I'd been lucky enough to fish with some of the pioneers of GT fishing. Anything from Andrew Parsons in Mozambique to the guys in the Seychelles, you know, Arno Mattia, Keith Ross-Innes, Yaku Lucas, all of these guys, Tim Babbage, Tim's Mind of Information, Wesley Leclerc, all of these guys, huge amounts of knowledge. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to write something which encapsulated everybody's knowledge on the subject. So I wrote to all of them and said, look, I'm going to do this. Would you be interested in participating? And everybody just put their hands up and said yes, including some of the guys who'd started the fishing on Christmas Island back in the 60s and 70s.
Wow, fantastic.
Characters like Tim Pask and some of the early pioneers of GT fishing, where, you know, they were being attacked by GTs on the surf line on Christmas Island, and they didn't even know what they were.
Yeah.
You hear Tim Pask's story of how his first encounter with a GT happened. He hooked a bonefish on the flat, and this thing had just charged out of the flats. It smashed it.
Really?
And
Wow.
he ran up into the middle of the flat and screamed like a girl.
Yeah.
Oh, what was that? But they all got involved. So not only is it my theories on what I've experienced, it's really me collating everyone else's knowledge, because I was the only one stupid enough to do it.
So it's a labour of love, I guess.
A complete labour of love.
Yeah.
And it seems to have been very well received. It's still selling, which is nice. But, you know, no one's ever going to get rich off a book.
And was that, as somebody who puts a magazine together every quarter, was it difficult, time consuming? Did you fit it over a period of time? Did you have deadlines or?
Yeah, no, I was working with a publisher.
Yeah.
Worked with Merlin Unwin on it.
Excellent.
And they were very good at making it structured. But the bit that I wrote, which is mostly the first part of the book, which is all the who, where, why, what, when, what tackle, tides, moon phases, all that kind of stuff, didn't take me very long at all. Took me about 8 months of sitting on my iPad just tapping away in the evenings. The bit that took a while was gleaning all the information from everyone else. Also, a lot of these guys, they're brilliant fishermen. Not very good at deadlines and editing.
Yep.
So I had to do a lot of pushing, shoving.
Yeah.
They're busy.
Yeah.
And collating pictures, images.
Images was that, I guess for something like that, it's got to be really
The images make that book.
Yeah.
Taken by brilliant photographers, brilliant guides. Everybody threw in their hat and got involved, and I think the images are what really makes it special.
Brilliant. Fantastic. It sounds a real passion, and you can feel your passion for that fish still after all these years. And so that's the one, is it? It's hard to come. It's
hard to compare that to another species because they're so brutally beautiful. To see them eating a bird.
Yeah. Well, BBC, it was amazing, wasn't it? Seeing it on there, it was.
I've been lucky enough to see that with my own eyes about 3 years previously on the same island. It was just amazing. I was like, did that actually happen?
Yeah, and that can only obviously be eclipsed by the flip-flop video.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I think happened at sort of roughly the same time when those guys first discovered that on Goulet on Farquhar.
Yeah.
But it was just, I mean, there's such an aggressive fish, but they're not stupid either. A lot of people think anybody can catch a GT. It's like people who tell you that bone fishing's easy. Yeah. They've obviously never fished for big bonefish. Yeah. Because big bonefish behave like permit. Right. Yeah. And they are hard. Yes. GTs can be similar. They can be on or off. Sometimes you need to persuade them. Yeah, no, they're just such a great species.
And it sounds as though, talking to you about these things, that it's more the off-the-grid destinations that appeal to you as an angler. Is that still the case, or...?
Yeah, for me personally, those are the bits that really get me going. I like to explore.
Yeah.
There are areas of the atoll I'm fishing at the moment at Providence where there are still areas where human beings have not walked. They're still discovering whole areas of it now. And that really gets me going. It's like, right, we're going to come off the beaten path. We're going to go and take a look at something completely different. It may be good, it may be bad. But that's what is fun.
So where do you have a destination that's on the list that you haven't actually discovered or fished, or there's somewhere you want to go that...
There's areas in the Central Pacific which definitely need investigation. There are other species I want to go and target too. For example, I'd love to go and do Bolivia for the big golden dorado. But sadly, with Stephen Jones in the office, I find it very difficult to make a case for doing that. Yeah. Which is very frustrating.
Another author as well.
Yeah, exactly. So Steph knows his onions.
Yep.
But yeah, South America is really his patch.
Yep.
So I can't strong arm in there, sadly.
Yep.
Also, he doesn't react particularly well to very strong sunlight, so we don't send him out to the tropical destinations.
So the world is a smaller place now, with travel, with internet, everything else. Does that make your job easier or harder?
Wow, that's a difficult question. I think with the internet, it certainly makes a lot more experts out there. There are a lot of people who are trying to sell fishing trips these days. The first thing I would advise anybody is see if they're atoll bonded. Yeah. If they're not atoll bonded, they're not legal. And what that means is that they are licensed by the Civil Aviation Authority, which means that if they go bankrupt, you are covered financially, you're protected. And that's the same goes for working with other destinations. If you're booking a trip direct, you have got no comeback. So the way we operate is we are exactly the same price as if you book an operation directly, but you are tapping into our knowledge on flights, net rates on flights, so that we have contracts with flights. We are there 24/7 on the telephone. If something goes wrong, we fix it for you. We give you all of our nerdy information and backup detail as to what you should be, so you are properly prepared when you go.
It was really nice walking into your office and speaking to the guys while you were sorting out your computer issues and just talking about fishing. Yeah. And where are you fishing? Where have you been? Where are you going? What are you doing? Are you catching fish?
It's like a little nexus of world fishing information.
Yeah.
The threads that come out from our little office all around the world. We're in contact with these operators on a daily basis. So we know what's happening on a flat in Mexico. Yeah. We know what's going on a particular river in Iceland. We know what's going on in Russia. We know what's going on in the Seychelles. We have our little tendrils right across. We're tapped into all of that information because most of these guys are our friends. We've worked with them for such a long time. They're mates. Yeah. And that's working with people who you trust to look after your clients as well as you expect them to be looked after. That's key. Fantastic.
So let's take you back to the UK now and look at chalkstream fishing. We're in Hampshire. We're in the bed of chalkstream fly fishing here. That's a part of your business as well that you've continued to grow over the last few years now.
Yeah, that's one of the side of the businesses which is growing quite quickly actually. With Alex Jardine running it at the helm, of course it was going to. Yeah. I don't think that guy ever had toys as a child. I think it was entirely
rods,
fishing tackle.
Yeah.
Most of us have grown up chalkstream fishing. I grew up chalkstream fishing in Norfolk, and then I used to guide down here myself a long time ago. I'm nothing like up to the same level as Alex is, obviously. And Ollie Thompson, who's just joined us as well, has also grown up chalkstream fishing. But it's on our doorstep, as you said, and it was mental that us as a fishing operator was not selling what was on our doorstep. Even though it's wasn't in our wheelhouse at the time, we grew a lot of connections very quickly, and we sell our chalkstream fishing in the same way that we sell international fishing trips. So it's detailed and it's full of... We make suggestions based on people's needs. We have access to most of the major areas on the rivers, and it's been an ever-growing part of the business.
And is that a way of growing customers there that may translate to overseas destinations,
Absolutely.
I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because a lot of clients would come to us already at the pinnacle of their fishing careers. They've already done all their local fishing. They've already done a lot of this. And this was a way to begin with, I think a lot of our clients were actually just coming fishing, booking chalkstream days, so that we would then go down and talk to them about another trip that was coming up. We'd be guiding them and chatting about destination fishing. Or they'd bring all their kit down and we'd have to go through it all and sort of say, right, well, this is good and this is not good. And that's how it kind of, I think, started. And then since then it's evolved to, we do everything from just day rod bookings to full-on group entertainment with white linen tablecloths and, sort of champagne at lunch and all of the rest of it. But it's great for us. We're very passionate trout fishermen. It's visual. And it's what we all do here all the time anyway. We all live here. And this is where we fish. So it's quite nice to share that with...
I remember that great chalk film with you and Alex fishing on... What river was that?
That was at Westover on the Anton.
Yeah, and that was really cool, actually. That looked really good fun. Yeah, you had some nice fish, didn't you? Yeah. So I guess this is one of those places, having been in and talked fishing with the guys, that you finish work and sometimes you go hit the river.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. That's what I like to hear.
Yeah, I mean, we have to fish.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's go in a slightly different direction to finish off. We've been chatting for an hour or so
really?
now.
An hour already.
And I know we touched on it very briefly, and I still think one of the biggest externally damages for fly fishing was the J.R. Hartley advert on British Telecom. I guess it was Yellow Pages, actually, wasn't it?
It was Yellow Pages,
It let people know about fly fishing, but it made people assume, and I still get it today, that people say, oh, what's the fishing you do? And you say it's fly fishing, and they say, oh, like J.R. Hartley. And a lot of people assume that a lot of them are genteel folk with check shirts on and of a certain age, yet, you look at the States, you look at Scandinavia, fishing is super cool, yet I discover, and I know you'll be in touch with this as well, that there are younger people out there fishing, doing some really cool stuff. How does fishing feel to you right now? What sort of state do you think it's in as a whole?
There's two sides to that, I would say. There's one, the worrying side, that I don't think enough parents are taking their children fishing. I know that there are barriers to entry for that in some instances, but actually, for example, I take my kids fly fishing for carp. £7 for a day. Anybody can do that. Bunch of dog biscuit, hook them into a bunch of fish. They absolutely love it. They learn how to cast and they learn how to do all of that. So there's the slightly worrying aspect of the next generation. Who's going to look after our rivers? We have to be proactive in getting our younger people off iPads and screens and outside. And then there's the other side of it where, fly fishing is cool now. It's becoming a cool sport. It's like snowboarding and, those kind of extreme sports, because certainly some of the stuff we're doing in the Salt is very, very extreme. But it can be just as detailed here on our home streams. We are not wandering around in tweed anymore. Mostly because it's really hot. It's a material which was very good for salmon fishing back in its day because it was warm when wet. But actually these days we've got modern fabrics. I know I'm being really geeky at this point and actually answering your question in a slightly different manner, but I think that there's a younger generation breaking through right now who are turning back to salmon fishing, for example, where I wasn't expecting that to happen. They have got some great role models in the industry, and it is becoming a cool sport again. You and I benefited off the back of the movie.
The film.
And when A River Runs Through It came out, every single person and their mother and brother ran out and bought fly fishing kit, got into it, and stillwater fisheries popped up all over the country, and it was a huge, huge market. But I think now it's driven from, it's a sport that people can enjoy outside. It is takes you to some of the most beautiful places, which are quiet and peaceful, And I think these days, actually getting a little downtime is becoming one of the most crucial elements in our lives. Our lives are so busy. We're constantly in communication. We're always in contact. You know, whether it's your mobile device, it's probably got about 7 avenues for people to contact you on. And it's all instant.
Yeah,
and it's just so important for us to actually take a step back, take a breath, and it refreshes us.
I think it's really interesting seeing, as you say, and as we've touched on, the younger people, and the thing I noticed from that is that there is more of an interest in catching wild fish and different fish. There's always obviously a place, and rightly so, for still waters. If somebody wants to catch a trout, and it's a great place to learn, the reservoirs, places like that. But I'm noticing more people want to, as much as they can in our overcrowded country, get away from stuff. And even in the centre of it, you know, the Wandle, what's going on there, and the young guys there,
Theo's
and
done there is incredible.
Theo, and the young guys who are fishing it as well.
Yeah.
You know, Tom, Damon,
Damon's
Johnny.
done it for
Yeah,
them.
you know, it's really interesting and fun to see them. And you know, the trout might not be biting, so they're looking at barbel. They're looking at other
Coarse fish
sharp
on fly.
and
I mean, it's,
yeah, bits and pieces like that, and going for the wild fish is kind of interesting. I'm lucky where I am in Devon. You know, we have Dartmoor on the doorstep, and fishing that's cheap. You know, 12 quid to go and fish Dartmoor, 30 odd miles of fishing for 12 quid.
yeah, I mean that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I'm very
Yeah.
jealous.
Yeah, and camping, and you know, we did several years ago with some friends, and we camped up there and caught some fish, and that sort of thing, I think, is interesting. And I watch the people in some of the other places catching these, so I'm not as down on it as possibly we could be. And it sounds as though you share a similar sort of view. That
I completely agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who are taking full advantage of the resources that we have. And I love the fact that people are now... We are not that nation anymore of British stuffy anglers. And I've really seen that change over the last decade. People will embrace any species that they can target on a fly. And why do we fly fish? We fly fish because we like the challenge of using flies rather than using bait or anything like that. They're just as great methods. If it's going to get you into fishing, get you outside, that's fantastic. We fly fish because we just prefer to do that.
Yeah.
We love casting. We love putting the fly exactly where it needs to go. And all of those disciplines that you train yourself on, the muscle memory of casting all the time, that is really the attractive element of it.
Yeah.
And it's great to see people embracing that.
Yeah, it is. I think I just do it for the take. I actually don't care. I'm sure there have been times, but I don't care if I get the fish. You know, it's that
I don't
moment.
care if I catch a fish.
Yeah,
I don't care if I cast.
Yeah, it still blows my mind that we tie something on with fur and feather, and a fish eats it. Whatever it might be, a saltwater species, trout, grayling, chub, whatever, is the reason I think many of us keep coming back.
It's the challenge.
Yeah.
It's the challenge.
We do it
of
because it's
doing
hard.
that. We do it because it's harder.
Yeah.
And I think that is the joy of fly fishing. And every day is a school day.
Yeah.
Nobody knows it
Yeah.
all. People are constantly evolving. Techniques that we used to use are being evolved all the time. You know, Alex still needs to teach me how to French leader fish properly.
Yeah.
Because I still haven't got my head around that
Yeah.
yet. Although I shall read Jonathan White's book, and
Yep.
and then I'll
Very
probably
good.
figure
Very
it out
good.
probably
Yep.
better. But the state of fishing in this country, it's in a good place, and I think we're seeing more people coming to the industry. Probably not through traditional avenues, though. You know, in the old days, it was always your dad would take you fishing, or your mum would take you fishing, or your brother or your siblings or your grandparents. And I think now people come to it through social media, which is one of the benefits of social media. They look at that and they go, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I want to go and try that.
Yeah.
And the internet is there for them to figure out how to do that, which it wasn't for us. We had to go find magazine articles, read books. It's the same information, but it's more accessible.
Yeah.
And I think that's great.
And that's a nice way to end, I think, on a positive note. I wish you all the very best with what you're doing, and it's been great to come along and talk to you. I always enjoy chatting to you about life and life in general. So thank you very much, Pete, for having me along.
That's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast as much as me. If you have, it would be really cool if you could leave us a review, like it, or subscribe it. Fly Culture Podcast is a stand-alone but part of Fly Culture Magazine. If you may or may not have seen Fly Culture Magazine, it's a quarterly magazine that we put out. You can buy that via our website, flyculturemag.com. We're on all the usual social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we hope you enjoy that. This is Pete Ty just saying thanks so much for listening. And I look forward to doing the next podcast. Thanks for listening, and good fishing.